We've got our fourth and final team in the NFC West. This is the 8th team that we've done, knocked out 2 divisions already. If you have not subscribed at this point, what are you doing? You know you're watching all of these videos. You're enjoying the series. We're enjoying putting these videos out for you guys. If you're finding them entertaining, if you're finding the content useful, something that you can apply to your real life knowledge, your fantasy teams, do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, drop a like, comment on the videos. We want to see support from this and basically just let us know that this is stuff that you want to see us do, not only this year, but moving forward into future years as well. Guys, we're talking about the 49ers today. 6-11 record last year. Not the season that we thought we were going to see out of San Francisco. They are historically a great team. But Brian, kind of what do you think about the 49ers?
Yeah, it was kind of non-impressive last year. And it kind of shows with their mass exodus that we just were talking about before we went on live. But yeah, it's I don't know. They're not what we were expecting them to be, and I don't know that we're going to see much different this year. But I know I got a good friend who is a 49ers fan. He's probably going to not be happy with me when I tell him that I've got his 49ers coming in last year in a little bit.
And guys, we're not here to be anybody's friends. We're not here to tell you what we think you want to hear. We're certainly not sports politicians. We call them as we see them. And really the biggest problem with the 49ers last year was not a lack of talent, but a lack of health. They had a lot of injuries. If you remember the biggest problem, the debacle with Christian McCaffrey, they were running his health right up to the beginning of the season. They held him out week 1, and they said, hey, if this was a playoff game, he would have been out there playing, but we hold him out as a precaution. He ends up missing the first 10 weeks of the season, and he doesn't come back until after their bye, and it crippled them. Yes, Jordan Mason was really good, but nobody can replicate what Christian McCaffrey does on that field. Nobody's going to be as productive as what he would have been in that offense last year. Brandon Ayuk had a very scary injury, and he's going to be attempting to bounce back from that. I don't expect him back at the beginning of the season. And when he returns, how good does he look? But Brian, you and I talked about this right before we started this video. If you look at the list of departures for the 49ers, it is extensive to say the least. Probably the biggest number of departures I've seen on a team in a single offseason ever in looking at football and rosters and things of that nature. And it's not nobody's either. There are some notable names. Guys, if you've been watching this series, we went through the AFC West, now the NFC West. I usually talk about 2 or 3. In the last video, I didn't bring up a single name because I didn't feel like there was one worth talking about. That is not the case when it comes to San Francisco. Deebo Samuel traded to Washington. The pair of Dre Greenlaw and the safety Hufanga both going to Denver. Leonard Floyd as an edge rusher going and joining the Atlanta Falcons. They traded backup running back Jordan Mason to Minnesota. Javon Hargrave, one of their better defensive linemen, also going to Minnesota. And then Charvarius Ward leaving. That was kind of one of their more productive big-name corners. He is now an Indianapolis Colt. They lost a lot of talent, so much so to the point that I would say that when you look at what they were able to do in the draft and who they were able to bring in free agency, this is very possibly the least talented roster that we've seen under Kyle Shanahan. And the person I feel sorry for is actually Robert Saleh. He had a very dominant 49ers defense. He leaves when he gets a head coaching opportunity with the Jets. He now leaves the Jets and gets hired back into his old job as defensive coordinator. And he had to walk in and look around like, guys, where did my talent go? Like, I handed you a great defense on a silver platter, and where did it go? He's got to start all over again, it seems like. And it's going to be tough sledding for the 49ers this year, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. Speaking of which, who's coming back and who do they re-sign?
Yeah, so as far as who they brought in, Brock Purdy is obviously the marquee name. That is their former Mr. Irrelevant, not so irrelevant anymore. He got a huge payday this offseason. They bring in Demarcus Robinson as a reserve receiver from the Rams. I think he's going to be very important to them at the beginning of the year. That trio of Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and what will eventually be Brandon Ayuk is not going to be intact at the beginning of the season. So I think Demarcus Robinson is going to be useful there. Richie Grant being a safety from Atlanta. I think is a good addition for their defense, maybe to replace that Hufanga role. And then Kyle Juszczyk is a fan favorite. I think what happened with him, if I'm remembering correctly, is they cut him for salary cap issues, and there were riots in the streets of San Francisco. There was looting and fires. No, there wasn't, but people were very upset about it, and they basically had to bring him back out of popular demand. He makes that run game work. He makes them better. He's good for a couple of really good plays a game as well. They sneak him out on the flats, and he makes plays and everything like that. He's somebody that makes them better. And I just don't know that they're able to replace enough talent in a single offseason for what they lost in free agency, and having to keep so much money on hand for that Brock Purdy extension, I think kind of hogtied them a little bit. So they're going to have to rely on having really good drafts for the next couple of years. And I think they did pretty good this year. They knew where to butter their bread. Michael Williams, a very talented edge rusher out of UGA, somebody that you're very familiar with as a Georgia fan. You saw what he's capable of doing in the SEC. I think he's going to be doing the same thing in the pros. That was their first-round pick. Alfred Collins is another productive defensive lineman, a defensive tackle from Texas. So they are drafting defenders from the SEC. Imagine that. Seems to be a pretty good recipe. It certainly worked for Philadelphia as they polished their new Lombardi trophy. And then in the third, Nick Martin, a linebacker from Oklahoma State. He is a tackling monster. I think he's athletically very gifted, somebody that I think can be somebody that steps in. I don't know that he'll be quite as good as what Dre Greenlaw was for that defense, but certainly can step in and help stop the bleeding, so to speak, a little bit. He could be productive. But the big note that I had for the draft is the first 5 picks they used on defensive players for San Francisco. They have running backs. They have a quarterback. They've got enough receivers. Obviously, they've got a very good tight end in George Kittle, one of the better ones in the league, even despite his elderly age. They knew that they had to restock the cupboard on defense. They brought Robert Saleh back. They have to give him tools to build that back up to what it was. And I think it was the first 5 and 6 of the first 8 of their draft picks were used on the defensive side of the ball. So a lot of new young faces on that defense. It's going to take them time to build that chemistry, gel, and get accustomed to the speed of the NFL game. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're both probably thinking that's the reason why this could be a down year for the 49ers after a down year for the 49ers last year.
Yeah, I agree. If we want to get into predictions, I kind of alluded to it at the top of this video, it's going to be a toss-up for me on who's going to be last place. Is it going to be the Seahawks or is it going to be the 49ers? I don't have either team doing very well. I think that, I said it when in our Arizona Cardinal video, how quick does that defense gel and get up to speed? I think with the 49ers, I think they're going to have a tougher time, and I don't think their offense is as good as Arizona's to get them, to bail them out like you'll see in Arizona. So, yeah, I'm probably going to give them 6 to 8 wins, maybe 6 to 9 wins this year. Probably closer to the 6 than the 9. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I have them as an 8 and 9 team. I think if it weren't for the Seahawks and how bad I think they could potentially look this year, the 49ers would be the seller team in that division. And I think the difference between having 6 wins and having 8 wins is that they probably beat the Seahawks twice this year and get a couple of wins on them, finishing 3rd in the division despite not looking that good. The one thing that I will say as far as the prediction goes, that if there is any team that I think will make us look foolish for our predictions, it's probably San Francisco, because we are throwing a lot of shade at them. We are doubting them, and they have enough firepower to make us look dumb. They could come out and have a 10 and 11 win season. So when you start talking about this team could win 5 wins or they could have 7 wins, it's a very small range of outcomes. I think the range of outcomes for San Francisco is probably the widest of any team. If you told me they got 6 wins, I'm not surprised. If you told me they got 11 wins, I'm less surprised than I would be with some other teams. So I think they could be a really good team and over exceed expectations and outproduce what I think they could be, or they could be exactly what I think they're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. If McCaffrey comes back and he looks like the McCaffrey of old, and Kittle as well, and Purdy comes out firing on all cylinders, oh yeah, I absolutely see the 49ers could take this division. I just, in my mind and what I think is going to happen, I just don't see it. But could they? Absolutely, 100%. They could come out and shock me. And I've been proven wrong before. So like I said, they could go to the Super Bowl. I don't have them going there, but they could. So
yeah, we've made a habit of getting into strengths and concerns, for all of these teams as we go through the video. And I think these marry perfectly well together when it comes to the 49ers. Their biggest strength is they have a known identity on offense. You look at Shanahan, his scheme is legendary. Robert Saleh is a familiar face, but he's going to have a lot of work to do in getting that defense back. Whereas when you look at on the offensive side, where you have Brock Purdy, you have Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, those are known guys that have been in the scheme for a while. They've been productive in the scheme, and their known identity on offense is in stark contrast to all the changes on defense, which I think is their biggest concern. Obviously, they have to stay healthy. Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk is already hurt. McCaffrey lost a lot of time last year. Kittle has lost a lot of games over the course of his career, but replacing all that lost talent on defense and having to rely on those 5 rookies that just got drafted in their first 5 picks, expecting every single one of those to not only be a starter but be a contributor, which we know are 2 different things, is a very tall task, a very big ask to put on such young men that are getting accustomed to the differences between a college and pro game.
I agree 100%. All right, with all of that, fantasy football, I mean, obviously you would want to throw a McCaffrey and Kittle on your team for sure. What about a Purdy? Do you think he's going to have a standout year, or at least enough to put on your fantasy team, or at least on your bench?
He definitely wouldn't want to be my starter. There are some leagues where I've punted the quarterback position, and I basically it becomes my strategy to say, I'm going to wait until the very end of the draft before I take a quarterback and say, okay, well, if my quarterback scores 5 points less than yours on a weekly basis, that's okay because I've used all of my picks on building up the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and I've made my lineup overall better by waiting on quarterback instead of using a premium pick on the position. That being said, I've won championships with Lamar Jackson, a lot of them. And so I understand the strength in having a really good high-scoring quarterback. At some point, me and a lot of other people are going to have to stop doubting Brock Purdy as an NFL quarterback. He's just one of those guys that I think about the brand of football that they play, and I don't think that he's the reason why they win. And last year, he was phenomenal, both in real life and in fantasy. Now, is a lot of that because they had to rely on him with Christian McCaffrey being hurt? And maybe he's doing less if McCaffrey is carrying the bulk of the workload like he did the year prior. Probably so. But could I see Purdy having to step up and be the true leader of that team and make amends for that giant contract he got and essentially earn his pay? Absolutely, I could see that. So whereas I personally don't take Brock Purdy and think of him as highly as I should, I could also recognize where that might be a mistake and a short sighting on my part.
And I think one of the receivers that doesn't get a lot of mention that could, potentially, I think he had several good games last year, and I think he's going to step up this year is Pearsall. I think he might not be your number 1 or your number 2, but I definitely think you put him on your bench to bring in certain games, certain situations. I like him as a wide receiver. I started following him at kind of mid last year. If I'm not mistaken, he's the one that got shot and came back and
yeah, he got shot over a Rolex. He was wearing a Rolex in town, and a guy shot him to take it from him. And he was fighting the dude with the gun. He's loaded up in the stretcher with a bleeding bullet hole in it. And he's like, I got my watch back, guys. Like, He was smiling being loaded into the ambulance. It was crazy to see the kid as tough as nails.
That's a tough kid right there.
And then to come back, and this year he's cemented as one of their 3 starting receivers. Nobody is taking his spot. When Brandon Ayuk comes back, it's Juwan Jennings, it's Brandon Ayuk, and it's Ricky Pearsall. He's going to have a lot of snaps. They're going to rely on him prior to Ayuk returning. I think him and Kittle and Jennings are all going to be productive. For me, and the reason why I don't necessarily want any of those receiving options besides Kittle is because similarly to Green Bay, it seems like they alternate who has the big week. It all depends on who's hurt that week, what the game plan is, that sort of thing. It's very specific. You're not going to see consistency from their receiving group. And so I want to see Christian McCaffrey be healthy and be that standout player for them. And that's going to make me stay away from the receivers outside of George Kittle.
Yep, I agree. All right. Guys, I believe that concludes the NFC West. I hope you've enjoyed this series of videos. And like Brad said at the top of this video, if you have any suggestions, likes, comments, any of that kind of stuff, please by all means let us know. Something you'd like us to add in, or maybe something that we missed that would be beneficial. But again, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it, Brad. And we will see you in the next video.